Hi, I'm Mikkel Bready. I'm the founder and director of Youth Mindfulness, and I've also been involved with the CCE, the Community of Contemplative Education, since really its inception in Rotterdam. And today, what I'd like to talk to you about is the importance of relationships in sharing mindfulness, particularly with teenagers and young adults. And I'd also like to talk a little bit as well about the importance of flexibility and responsivity in this work. But before I get to that, I want to share a little bit with you about the background on youth mindfulness and where these kind of learnings for us really arose. So I started practicing mindfulness when I was about 18 years old. And it was something that never really went away in my life. It just kind of grew in importance and significance. And after some years, I went and spent long periods of time in retreat and meditation centers in different parts of the world, in India and Nepal. And I studied for a master's in positive psychology when I was about 24 years old. And when I was doing that, one of the things that I came across, one of the things I discovered was this kind of coming together between Western science and the Eastern wisdom religions. And it was actually with Mind and Life, actually, that I really hit upon this and discovered this. And Mind and Life were really, really influential to me back then. And when I completed my master's, I came back to Scotland and I was really passionate about this new field of science, this new exploration of human well-being and how we can cultivate human flourishing, and also my own personal mindfulness practice. And I wanted to bring these together into some kind of project that could be a benefit to young people and really to wider society. And so this was about 10 years ago now. So about 2010, 2011, I started Youth Mindfulness. And for a big chunk of that time, for a big chunk of the early years of our work, I was working on developing a program for school children aged about 7 to 11 years old. And this eventually became the Youth Mindfulness Kids program. And the Youth Mindfulness Kids program is a 16-lesson program that goes through the real foundations of mindfulness practice, of kind of embodied awareness, and then moves on to explore themes like gratitude, like kindness, like how we can handle difficult emotions. And so what we found with the kids program was that we could take these 16 lessons into really any group of kids from 7 years old to 11 years old, into different schools again and again, and it worked. We found the games worked, the videos worked, there was a real consistency to it. And as we started to work more and more with adolescents and young adults, our hope was that we would develop, our intention was to develop a similar kind of standardized set of lessons that we could take to any different group and it would work the same every time. And slowly this intention began to kind of wither away as we found that actually working with teenagers and young adults is a very different ballgame to working with the younger children. And I definitely found this in my work with the young men in the prison. I worked with kind of 18 to 21 year olds in a young offenders institute in Scotland for 4 years. And again, in doing that work, we had the intention to come up with a kind of standardized curriculum, but we found that each group needed different approaches, and it was very difficult to stay kind of aligned to like a session plan. Like when you would start, you might have a session plan or a lesson plan, what you want to accomplish. You go into that lesson, go into that session, and something entirely different emerges, or you have to respond in a different way. So I want to share with you some of the kind of key principles, the key learnings that we discovered in this work that we found are really, really important in working with teenagers that were quite different to our experience of working with the younger children. And one of the things that we found was that relationships is really, really key, really, really central. And one of the reasons for this, I think, we kind of hit upon the fact that this was so important was because for most young people from the age of, I would say, kind of 13, 14 onwards, their default state is not one of safeness, but one of really unsafeness, actually, if I can use that word. And I like the word safeness as opposed to the word safety. I remember hearing this distinction that safety is often something we experience in the context of a threat. So we escape to safety if there's a fire nearby. But safeness we can think of as more the physiological experience of being really at ease when there is a complete absence of threat. It's the kind of experience we have when we're in the company of somebody who's very warm, who's very compassionate, who's really delighting in being with us just as we are. And when we experience that kind of relationship with another human being, that really allows us to be completely at ease in ourselves. And so we found that the young people are really far away from that state of safeness. One of the questions that we often ask young people right at the beginning of our programs is, what stresses you out? And if you ask a 9-year-old that, maybe some of them will have an answer, maybe some won't. Stress is probably a kind of an infrequent thing in their life, not for all 9-year-olds, but for a number of them. But when you get to those teenage years, 13, 14, 15, the list of the stresses is very, very long, and it's a kind of a persistent thing in their life. The other thing that we often ask young people early on in our programs is, do you ever feel judged? And this is part of the kind of, as we're setting up the group dynamics, we do group agreements, we want to create a space of non-judgment. And we ask the question, do you ever feel judged? And almost across the board, all the young people we work with, all the teenagers put their hands up and say, yes, I feel judged. And they often feel judged by their peers. They feel judged by their teachers often, by the school system, sometimes by their parents. And then add to that social media. So there's a lot of experience of stress and unsafeness within young people. And another major kind of piece of the puzzle that fell into place for us in this work was the research on adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And this was something that we were finding in our own experience as we started to work with young people more and more and learn more about their lives and learn more what was going on for them, that a lot of young people experience a significant amount of adversity and trauma. And the research shows this as well. About 50% of young people by the time they reach the age of 18 will have had one adverse childhood experience. And so the kind of classic list of adverse childhood experiences includes things like emotional, physical neglect, emotional, physical or sexual abuse, various forms of household dysfunction. And about 14% of young people by the time they reach the age of 18 will have experienced 4 or more. So one of the things it was a kind of a lightning bulb moment for us was that trauma and adversity is not some rare, uncommon thing, but it's really kind of woven through the fabric of society, and it's in every classroom, every school, every group of young people you work with. There will be young people that are affected by significant trauma and adversity. And one of the things that this does is activates the stress system, often in a chronic way. It kind of makes the young person, and not just young people, but adults as well, we're more hyper alert to threat, and our stress system is overactivated. And so we're kind of left with this question, okay, how do we down-regulate that stress system so that young people can come into a space of safeness and ease, relative ease, so that they can be curious and exploratory and kind of receptive to learning? And the most powerful answer we found, the most powerful pathway we found has been through relationships and the engagement that comes through relationships. And again, this is borne out with the research. A few researchers that were particularly influential to us were Dan Siegel in his whole field that he's really pioneered on interpersonal neurobiology. Stephen Porges developed the polyvagal theory. And Barbara Fredrickson also, she has a wonderful book called Love 2.0, which is really about positive emotions and how they help us connect as human beings. And the kind of big message from all of this research is that human beings, we as human beings, are wired to connect with each other. And we are wired to pick up the emotional states of other people. So if we are in contact with someone who's in a stressed or kind of fearful state or activated state, that tends to activate ourselves. If we are in the connection with someone who's in a relaxed state, an easy state, or an easeful state, if they feel warm and kind to us, we start to feel in a much more calm, relaxed space. So this we found was actually really key. And what we came up with was this idea, this principle that is really at the heart of our SOMA program, which is our program for teenagers and young adults at Youth Mindfulness. And that key concept is relationship before content. So most of the time in education, the focus is on teaching content, the concepts that we're covering, the knowledge that needs to be imparted in whatever subject it is, but maybe not so much is spent thinking about how do we build relationship. What we found, and I think this is particularly true for this type of work in sharing mindfulness, is that if you don't have the relationship in place first, that positive relational environment where people feel safe and connected, there's no point in teaching the content because it's not going to come in. One, the young people aren't really connected and listening to it because their attention is not really on the content. It's actually picking up, kind of aware of where there might be threat or other young people judging them. But secondly, even if they do get the content at an intellectual level, that's not really what the space we want to teach to. We want to teach them more down to the embodied and actually down to the emotional and personal level. And for the young people to be receptive to that learning, that's where safeness is really, really important. And that's where a positive relational environment is really your foundation. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how do we actually cultivate that? How do we generate that? And there's a few things that we've found, kind of simple, small things that are actually really, really powerful. So one is smaller group sizes. And I think this is particularly important for young people affected by trauma and adversity. If you are working with a group who are affected by trauma and adversity and they're sitting in a group of 30 young people, it's very difficult to feel safe in that context. But if the group is sized as maybe 8 or 10 or 12, already you've got more of a basis for the group coming together as one, for more cohesion to manifest, to emerge. The other thing that we found is really, really powerful is games. And this was a surprise to us because we would have thought, okay, the children will enjoy the games, younger ones, but not 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds or 14-year-olds. Actually, right through from 12 up to 21, we find that young people, if the games are good games, they'll enjoy them. They'll get into them. They'll have fun with them. And that produces positive emotion, which produces connection among the young people. And if you can then actually connect the game to a learning point in mindfulness, a learning outcome of mindfulness, that can be even more powerful. The other thing that's really helpful is generating discussion. So rather than taking an approach of just kind of communicating ideas and a kind of a one-way teaching, actually dropping in good questions can be really helpful. So that question, what stresses you out, we find is a really powerful one to get young people talking. Another thing that we do in the SOMA program is explore the whole idea of character strengths. We use a lot of videos that are very emotive to bring these to life. And we have the young people discuss about them, but then we actually ask them, what are your character strengths? What character strengths do you see in your friends? And these kind of conversations can be very powerful in generating that kind of interaction and communication that builds relationship and safeness. And the other thing that is really key, almost goes without saying, but it's so fundamental, is genuine care. Having that genuine care to young people. I remember often working with the young men in prison, if sometimes they would waver, they would think about coming, they would maybe be on the verge of dropping out of courses. If I went down to their cell within the prison and told them that I really wanted to be there and showed them that care, I often found that made a massive impact in their engagement and their continuing participation in the course. So showing genuine care can be really, really powerful. The other thing that we found that is really important in this work, and this really builds off of that foundation of a strong relationship with the young people, is being flexible and responsive. So if you're really more connected with the young people, it's possible to have a better sense of what their needs are, what their dispositions are, what their different learning styles are. And so that's really powerful. One of the reasons that it's important to be flexible and responsive is, at one level, just a practical level. Again, this was something that we found was different in working with the younger kids. In high schools, it can often be the case that the timetable is much more restrictive. So we've had experiences when we work with young people just before their exams, and we maybe have just 6 sessions, 45 minutes or 50 minutes each. There's very, very little amount of time, maybe over 6 weeks. But if you can craft the lessons well, you can actually make quite a big impact in that short space of time. But we've also had experiences working with maybe 12, 13-year-old teenagers who are at risk of dropping out of school, who their behaviour is more of an issue. They're more affected by emotional or relational issues in their life, often more affected by trauma and adversity. And in that context, we've often found that the schools are quite happy for these young people to have more time out of class, because they see that that's where a lot of work is needed. And we might work with the young people intensively for maybe 4 hours a day for a whole week, and then 2 hours at a time for maybe another 8 weeks. And so on that level, there's different possibilities in different contexts. Different young people or also maybe whether you're not working in a school, but maybe in a community context, that the scheduling of a course or the time available can be different. And so that offers the possibility to be quite flexible and responsive to the context. But also, as I've kind of mentioned, there's this flexibility and responsivity to the young people themselves. So I'll give you some examples of this. Often when we've been working with slightly older groups of young people, maybe 16, 17 years old, if there's a little bit of skepticism early on in the course, it can be really good to start sessions with some explanation of some of the scientific research or some intellectual rationale for mindfulness before you then go into a mindfulness practice. Because if they kind of get it up here, then they can be more willing to engage with the practice. However, with some of the younger groups that we've worked with that maybe have more emotional behavioral issues, if you started the session with a mini lecture or a mini kind of exposition on the scientific research, they would probably be completely disengaged and kind of turn off. So what we often did with a lot of groups that we worked with who were maybe, to use the kind of vernacular, a little bit wilder, their behavior was a little bit wilder. They would be running around the classroom, or they wouldn't settle. They'd be less engaged in that kind of intellectual content. What we would do is start with a body scan practice. So when they come in, the very first thing they do, we already have the mats set up, we already have the blankets set up. They're lying, when we get them lying down and they're ready to go. Now it might take 10 minutes for them to actually settle. But once we would get them doing a body scan practice, and that lasts for 5 or 10 minutes, after that, what that really enables is their physiology to be kind of calmed and down-regulated, their stress to be down-regulated. And they're in a more relaxed, easeful state. And then they're actually more in a position to take in any kind of teaching point that you may want to impart, or any scientific research or intellectual rationale that you want to share with them. So that's just a sense of where you might just flip the order of things to meet the dispositions and needs of different groups. I'll give you one more example that also speaks a little bit to the importance of teachers' intuition in this work, which I think is something that as educators we use all day long, and it's so vital. And it's maybe somewhat underappreciated, maybe in the scientific realm anyway, because it's not well understood. But I'll give you this example. So there was one group that we were working with where we started with these body scan practices in every session. And there was one girl that never wanted to lie on the floor, and she always wanted to sit on a chair and hold her rucksack on her lap. And you could tell, it was really easy to tell that she didn't feel comfortable on the floor, and she felt safe and more kind of contained in that seating position. And so every time we would start, we'd have most of the kids lying on the floor, and she would sit like that, and it was fine. And then 2 or 3 sessions in, a couple of the boys started saying, "Why does she never have to lie down? We don't want to lie down. I want to sit in a chair." And I could just tell, and again, this is just kind of intuition. In Scotland, we would say, these young boys, they're at it. They're just trying to be subversive. They're just pushing back for the sake of it. Just like young people do. And so in that moment, I didn't really give them any credence. I didn't give them what they were saying much value. I just said, boys, you're fine. Just lie down on the floor and get on with it. She's fine there, okay? And we just started. And, they huffed and puffed a little bit, but they went into it. So that was a case where I was managing to hold the boundaries of the space. Because if I let the boys sit up, then they'd probably take, it's that phrase that you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So they find, right, where's the next boundary I can push? So I held the boundary, but also met the needs of that young girl who needed something different in that space. So again, this is just a sense of why I think in this work, we really have to tune into our intuition to be flexible and responsive to the needs. And what we developed at Youth Mindfulness in the Summer program, what we really have been thrilled about working and developing on, and now we're training others, is how we can take the kind of solid principles of mindfulness and the important themes that need to be covered, but how we can find ways to make this adaptive and responsive to the needs of young people and in different contexts over different timescales in different formats of courses. So what I'd like to leave you with is these 3 key points. The first is really the importance of relationships and the idea of putting relationship before content. And maybe as that little story that I just shared illustrated, this is not about being kind of soft and woolly. And part of relationships is holding the boundaries. We often talk in this work about holding the space for people, but part of holding the space is holding the structure. And when we hold that strong structure and we get clear boundaries, that's the container where young people can start to feel safe. That's a really important point. The other point, of course, is that flexibility and responsivity that they can come through really being connected and having a relationship-based approach. And then, of course, what kind of emerges from that is we have a basis for them being trauma sensitive. And being able to make this kind of approach, make these practices accessible and available for young people affected by chronic stress and adversity. So I hope this has been helpful. My name's Mikkel Brady. You can learn more about our work at youthmindfulness.org. And I hope to see you and connect with you sometime in the future.